In the heart of a shadowy warehouse, where the air reeked of oil and desperation, John shoved Commander Price aside, just as the masked kingpin's pistol flashed. Fire tore across his ribs, but he refused to fall, not with his family's future on the line. Mercenaries swarmed like shadows come alive, rifles barking in the crimson strobe lights, turning every corner into a kill zone. Trapped in the belly of the beast, the Navy SEALs fought with lethal precision, but the commander laughed, his voice echoing like thunder. This was never about your boy. We own fear. Then from the catwalk above, a small, defiant voice pierced the chaos. Hey, as 15-year-old Ethan, trembling yet unbreakable, blinded the monster with a flashlight's glare. In that split second, a single shot rang out, crumpling the Empire's head. But as federal backup stormed in, John knew the nightmare's roots ran deep. Evil knocks politely, disguised as order, and it's never truly done. It started with a knock, not a polite knock, not the kind of knock you'd expect from a neighbor or a delivery man. No, this was different. Bang, bang, bang. The front door shook on its hinges. Sarah dropped her spoon in the sink, eyes wide. John, who is that? It's barely 7 in the morning. Before I could answer, another round of pounding hit the door. The sound echoed through the house, heavy and demanding, like someone trying to break their way in. Then came the voices, harsh, sharp, angry. Open up, HOA inspection. Open the door now. Another voice followed, deeper, colder. Immediate compliance required. If you don't open this door, we'll escalate. My stomach dropped. I froze for a moment, listening. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. John, that doesn't sound like the HOA. That sounds like I know, I muttered, cutting her off. Stay here. Don't move. I walked to the door, each step heavier than the last. The pounding hadn't stopped. My pulse beat in my ears, almost keeping rhythm with the thuds. Clack. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open just enough to see who was outside. And there they were. 4 men, tall, broad, and hard-faced, stood on my porch like they owned it. They wore dark blue jackets, with big black letters on the back. HOA inspector, but they didn't look like inspectors. Not by a long shot. Their arms were covered in tattoos that crept out from under their sleeve. Their eyes, cold, calculating, almost hungry, met mine without a flicker of courtesy. The way they stood, legs apart, shoulders squared. I'd seen that posture before, back in the service, not on administrators, on men who were used to intimidation. The one in front stepped closer, tilting his chin up. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and held it up like a badge. His voice was low, flat, like steel scraping against steel. According to Clause 7B of the HOA, we have authority to detain any underage resident for safety inspection. For a second, I didn't even process the words detain, safety inspection. My jaw tightened. Something in my gut screamed, this was wrong. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could get a word out, 2 of the men behind him shoved past me, straight into my home. Hey, I barked, spinning on my heels. What the hell do you think you're doing? But it was already too late. They had eyes on Ethan, my boy, 15 years old, lanky, still half asleep in his t-shirt, standing frozen in the hallway. His hair was sticking up in every direction like he just stumbled out of bed. He didn't even understand what was happening. One of the men reached him in 3 long strides, clamping a tattooed hand around his wrist. Ethan jerked back, startled, his voice cracking. Dad, what's going on? Sarah screamed from behind me, her voice shrill with panic. John, they're taking him. Stop them. The man yanked Ethan forward, dragging him toward the front door. My son's feet scraped against the hardwood, his free hand clawing at the air. Dad! I lunged forward, but the second intruder blocked me, shoving a heavy arm into my chest. His breath reeked of cigarettes, as he leaned close and hissed, step aside. This is authorized. Authorized? I shoved back, fury boiling inside me. You've got no damn authority in my house. Ethan stumbled as the first man tugged harder, pulling him across the threshold. The kid's sneakers squealed on the tile. He was terrified, eyes darting, breathing fast like a deer caught in headlights. Sarah was sobbing now, clutching her hands together. Please don't take him. He's just a boy. But they didn't care. They didn't flinch. They didn't even look at her. The leader stepped forward, calm as ice, still holding that crumpled piece of paper, like it meant something. Cooperation is mandatory. Non-compliance will be penalized. My fists clenched. Every instinct in me screamed to act, to fight, to rip those bastards off my son. My mind raced back to my own training, to every fight or flight moment I'd ever faced. But before I could decide, before I could take another step, Ethan was yanked onto the porch, the morning air hitting his face. The world seemed to slow down. Sarah's cries blurred into noise. My heartbeat pounded, so loud I could barely hear anything else. And in that moment, staring at these so-called inspectors with their fake papers and their thug faces, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't about the HOA. This wasn't about rules or inspections. This was an ambush. And my son was the target. I bolted after them, but the big one with the sleeve tattoos shoved me hard into the wall. My shoulder smacked the plaster, rattling a picture frame to the floor. Glass shattered at my feet. Ethan cried out again, his voice cracking like it hadn't since he was 10. "Dad, please don't let them." "Quiet," the man growled, jerking Ethan's arm higher behind his back. My boy grimaced in pain, stumbling forward. Sarah lunged from the kitchen, her face white as chalk. "Stop. He's a child. You can't do this." She grabbed at one of the men by the arm, but he flung her off like she was nothing. She hit the side of the counter, gasping, tears streaming. That was it. My blood boiled. I pushed off the wall and charged. "Get your damn hands off my son." The leader snapped his fingers without even looking at me. In an instant, the second thug blocked my path again, planting both hands against my chest. He leaned in close, his voice low and menacing. "One more step, old man, and you'll regret it, old man." I wanted to tear him apart right there, but the way he said it, the confidence, the calm, it froze me just long enough. They weren't scared of me, not one bit. Outside, the early morning light was spilling over the street. The neighborhood was waking up. Miss Carver, 2 houses down, was watering her bayons in her robe and slippers. She froze, hose dangling in her hand as she watched Ethan being dragged across our porch like some kind of criminal. Another neighbor, Hank, shuffled out with his paper, squinting through his glasses. "What in the Sam here?" he muttered, looking from the men in blue jackets to me to Sarah, then back again. "Stay back," the tattooed one barked at them. "Official HOA inspection. Nothing to see here." Official, my God. And they believed it. Miss Carver clutched her chest, whispering to herself, "Oh dear Lord," and disappeared back into her house. Hank frowned, but he didn't move. He thought this was real. They all did. Sarah's voice cracked through the morning air, raw and desperate. "Help us. Somebody call the sheriff. They're taking Ethan." The leader turned his head, his eyes narrowing, his lips curling into a thin smile. He liked the fear. He thrived on it. He raised the fake paper again, waving it just enough for the neighbors to see. "Legal authority under Clause 7B. Safety protocols. Step inside, ma'am. This isn't your concern." It was a performance, a well-rehearsed act, and for a terrifying moment, it worked. The neighbors hesitated. None of them moved. Ethan kicked out wildly, his sneaker catching one of them on the The man grunted and twisted his arm harder, making Ethan cry out, "Don't fight, kid. Makes it worse." That was the moment I snapped. I surged forward, grabbing the thug by the collar and yanking him back from Ethan. He staggered, surprised, but before I could land a punch, another fist smashed into my ribs from the side. White-hot pain shot through me, knocking the air from my lungs. I stumbled back, clutching my side. Sarah screamed, "Jump!" The leader stepped down from the porch, cool as ever, and leaned toward me. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Compliance would have kept you safe. Now," he tilted his head toward Ethan, who was still struggling, "we'll have to teach the boy what happens when rules are broken." My chest heaved. Rage burned inside me, hotter than the pain in my ribs. Over my dead body, the tattooed thug smirked. "That can be arranged." Time slowed. My son's wide, terrified eyes locked on mine. Sarah was on her knees, sobbing. The neighbors stood frozen, unsure, scared to act. And me, I felt powerless for the first time in years. But something stirred in me then. A memory, a promise I made long ago to protect my family no matter the cost. My fists curled, ready to take another hit, ready to throw myself at them, even if it meant breaking. And just as I braced myself, just as I prepared to lunge, the kitchen door behind me creaked open. A calm, steady voice spoke from the shadows of my home. "You boys picked the wrong house." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. "You boys picked the wrong house." Every head turned from the kitchen doorway. 3 men stepped out. Casual clothes, jeans, t-shirts, coffee mugs still in their hands. But their eyes, their posture told a different story. Shoulders squared, feet planted, calm as stone in the middle of a hurricane. I knew those eyes. I'd seen them before. Years ago. Brothers in arms, Navy SEALs. My heart leapt. Relief surged through me, chasing away the helplessness that had been choking me seconds earlier. The leader of the intruders blinked, thrown off for the first time. He lowered his fake document. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" One of the SEALs, tall, lean, his voice cool as steel, set his mug down on the counter behind him, with deliberate calm. "We're the men who are going to end this." A beat of silence. You could feel the electricity crackle, then chaos explode. The thug dragging Ethan yanked harder, trying to pull him down the steps. But before he made it 2 feet, a SEAL launched forward faster than I could follow. His hands snapped around the man's wrist, twisted it at an angle that made bone and sinew scream. The thug howled, dropping Ethan instantly. In a blink, he was on the ground, face pressed to the porch boards, his arms cinched behind him, with a zip tie. 10 seconds ago, my son was being kidnapped. Now he was free, shaking, but free. The tattooed brute who punched me roared and charged, fists swinging. The second SEAL slid in, sidestepping with surgical precision. His elbow drove into the thug's ribs, followed by a sweep that sent 200 lab of muscle crashing onto the grass. Before the man could rise, plastic cuffs were yanked tight around his wrists. "2 down," the SEAL muttered. The leader cursed, pulling a knife from under his jacket. He lunged at the tall SEAL, blade flashing. My heart clenched, but the third SEAL moved like lightning. He intercepted, caught the man's wrist, mid-swing, and with a flick of his hip, sent the knife clattering across the porch. The next moment, the leader was slammed against the railing, both arms locked behind his back in a brutal hold. The snap of a second zip tie echoed sharp as a gunshot. The last intruder froze at the foot of the steps, eyes darting, weighing his chances. He spun, ready to bolt. "Don't," one of the SEALs barked. Too late, he sprinted. The tall one didn't even chase. He stooped, grabbed the knife from the floor, and with deadly accuracy, hurled it end over end. Not to hit, but to intimidate. The blade buried itself in the ground, inches from the runner's foot. The man skidded to a halt, trembling. A second later, strong arms yanked him back, slammed him to the earth, and bound him like the rest. And just like that, it was over. Silence, heavy breathing. My ribs throbbed, my knuckles ached, but I was standing. My son was safe, clinging to Sarah's side. The intruders, these so-called HOA inspectors, lay sprawled on the lawn, hog-tied in neat rows. Neighbors had gathered now, dozens of them, drawn by the commotion. Phones were out recording, voices murmuring. Then a cry rose up. "They're cops. Why are you attacking cops?" I spun, heart sinking. The jackets, the fake patches. To the neighbors it must have looked like federal officers being assaulted. The tall SEAL raised his voice, firm and commanding, pulling something from his pocket. He held up a leather wallet, snapping it open for all to see. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. These men are not law enforcement. They are imposters, and they are now under federal arrest." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Murmurs turned into shouts of shock, disbelief. Phones zoomed in, recording the badge glinting in the sun. Sarah clutched Ethan tighter, whispering into his hair, tears of relief soaking her cheeks. My boy buried his face in her shoulder, still shaking, but alive. I stood frozen, chest heaving, the adrenaline still roaring in my veins. I looked from the SEALs to my family, then down at the hog-tied thugs on my lawn. For the first time all morning, I could breathe, but deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. For a moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat. The thugs lay bound on my lawn, groaning, writhing. My son was safe in his mother's arms, still trembling, but and the three SEALs stood over the chaos they had created, calm as ever, breathing steady. Then the noise hit me. The neighbors, dozens now, crowding along the street, phones held high, some gasped, some whispered, others argued in half-panicked tones. "Did you see that?" They jumped the inspectors. No, no, those weren't inspectors. They had badges. I saw the jackets. My God, they were armed. I think I saw a knife. A woman's voice rose above the others, sharp, accusing. "You attacked officers of the law." I saw the jackets. I turned, furrowing in my throat. But the tall SEAL was already ahead of me. He raised his voice, projecting across the crowd, his badge still gleaming in the morning sun. "Listen carefully. These men are not law enforcement. They are not HOA inspectors. They are organized criminals posing as officials to extort and abduct. You just witnessed an FBI operation in progress." Gasps, murmurs, phone zoomed closer, recording every word. One man shouted back, skeptical, "If that's true, then why here? Why this house?" The SEAL's jaw tightened, his eyes flicked toward me, then back to the crowd. "That information is classified." His voice cut like steel. "But I assure you, your neighborhood was their hunting ground. And now they're finished." Sarah pulled Ethan tighter against her chest. I could feel her trembling from where I stood. My boy lifted his face just enough to look at me, eyes wide, wet, and afraid. I wanted to tell him it was over, that he was safe, but deep down, I wasn't sure. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Red and blue lights soon painted the street. Local deputies spilled out of cruisers, hands hovering near their holsters, confusion written all over their faces. As they took in the scene, 4 men zip-tied in my yard, 3 strangers holding FBI credentials, and a crowd of hysterical neighbors. "Stand down." One of the SEALs barked, flashing his badge again. "Federal operation. Suspects are secured. Area is safe." The deputies hesitated, then lowered their hands. One of them, a younger guy, barely 30, approached me cautiously. "Sir, are you and your family all right?" I tried to answer, my voice caught in my throat. Finally I managed. "They tried to take my son." The deputy's eyes hardened. He nodded once, then turned to bark orders at his men. Evidence bags, transport vehicles, chain of custody. It was a blur after. The impostors were hauled up, still snarling, cursing under their breath, but bound tight. Their jackets were stripped, revealing no insignia inside, no proper ID, nothing but cheap knockoff patches and counterfeit documents. One of them spat on the grass, glaring at me as he was shoved into a cruiser. His words still ring in my ears. "This isn't over." I shivered, though the sun was already warm on my neck. The neighbors didn't go back inside. No, they stayed whispering, filming, feeding the rumor mill. A dozen versions of the story were already being spun. I could tell some said we'd resisted real inspectors, others insisted it was a gang war spilling into suburbia, and a few finally started to believe what the SEAL had said. I caught Mrs. Carver's eyes from across the lawn. She looked ashamed. She'd run when I begged for help. Now she just stood there clutching her robe, unable to meet my gaze. One of the SEALs, the lean one with the steady hands, placed a firm grip on my shoulder. "Inside now, we need to debrief before this gets out of control." I nodded. My legs felt like lead, but I followed him back toward the porch. Sarah clung to Ethan, guiding him carefully, whispering comfort through her tears. Once the door shut behind us, the noise from outside dulled to a low roar. The tall SEAL leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes locked on me. "You need to understand something, John. This wasn't random. They weren't just checking doors, hoping to find trouble." I swallowed hard, dread curling in my gut. "Then what were they after?" The SEAL's expression darkened. "They wanted your boy, and we think we know why." Inside the kitchen, the morning light slanted across the table, cutting harsh shadows between us. Sarah sat with Ethan, pressed against her side, her arm never leaving his shoulders. My boy was pale, lips quivering, but he didn't cry anymore. He just listened. The tall SEAL set his badge on the table, metal glinting. His voice was calm, but edged with warning. "My name is Commander Price. These two are Special Agents Torres and Maddox. We're assigned to an interagency task force. What you saw this morning wasn't just a break-in. It was a targeted attempt." I frowned, anger bubbling just under my ribs. Targeted at my son? Why? He's 15. He's just a kid. Price didn't blink. That's exactly why. Silence pressed in. Sarah tightened her grip on Ethan, whispering, "What are you saying?" Agent Torres leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice lower, more careful. These men weren't just muscle for hire. They're part of a network that's been operating under the radar, posing as housing inspectors, code enforcers, even utility workers. They identify vulnerable families, and then they strike. My chest clenched. Strike? How? Abductions, Maddox said flatly. Teenagers, usually boys. They vanish. Families are told it's a runaway situation. Local authorities chalk it up as domestic problems. But we've been tracking patterns. Different counties, different HOAs, always the same methods. Loud authoritative entry, fake paperwork, claims of authority. They move fast, take the kid, and they're gone before anyone questions it. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes brimmed with terror. My God! I slammed a fist against the table, the sound startling even me. And you're telling me they picked my son out of all the kids? Why him? Price's gaze didn't waver because Ethan isn't random. Someone fed them his name, someone close enough to know when he'd be home, and someone who knew you wouldn't expect it. Ethan's eyes darted to me, desperate. Dad, did I do something? Is this my fault? I leaned across the table, grabbing his shoulders gently but firmly. No, never. Do you hear me? This isn't on you. But inside, doubt gnawed. Who would single us out and why? Price cleared his throat. There's more. We intercepted chatter on encrypted channels last week. They mentioned this neighborhood. They mentioned a boy fitting Ethan's description. We moved fast, but apparently not fast enough to stop the first attempt. Sarah's voice cracked. You mean they'll come back? Torres shook his head. Not these men. They're done. But the network doesn't stop with 4 thugs. There's a structure, orders, money changing hands. Whoever ordered this won't just shrug it off. The room fell into suffocating quiet. Ethan clutched Sarah's hands so tightly his knuckles turned white. Finally, I forced the question out. So, what do we do? Price studied me for a long beat. Then his answer came cold and certain. We protect your son. From this moment forward, your home is under federal watch. You'll see agents in unmarked vehicles. You'll notice rotations. Don't be alarmed, but don't ignore protocol either. Until we find the route, Ethan is a target. Sarah shook her head, almost pleading. But we're just normal people. We're not part of anything. Why would criminals want him? The SEALs exchanged a look. Maddox exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. We don't know yet. Could be a mistaken identity. Could be leverage against someone connected to you. Or, he hesitated, or Ethan might have stumbled across something without realizing it. My boy looked bewildered. I haven't. Price interrupted, his tone softening just a hair. Son, it may not be anything you did. Sometimes the reason isn't obvious at first, but trust me, we're going to find out. The sound of voices outside swelled again, muffled through the walls. Neighbors still lingered, rumors spreading like wildfire. Price stood, slipping his badge back into his pocket. One more thing you need to hear. His eyes narrowed. Not everyone in this community is what they seem. These men had help. Someone nearby giving them access, telling them when to strike, which means he paused, letting it sink in. Your HOA isn't just incompetent, it's compromised. Sarah gasped. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. And Ethan, he just buried his face against her side, whispering the words no father should ever have to hear. Dad, are they going to take me away? I couldn't answer. Not yet. By mid-afternoon, the quiet street we once called home no longer felt like ours. Cars slowed as they passed the house, drivers craning their necks, curtains twitched in nearby windows. A cluster of neighbors stood on the opposite sidewalk whispering, their arms folded tight as if the summer air had suddenly chilled. I caught fragments carried on the breeze. Police tackled boy in cuffs. Something illegal. Sarah closed the living room blinds with shaking hands. They're staring like we're criminals. Ethan hovered near the staircase, his eyes flicking between us. He didn't have to hear the words. We both knew he felt the judgment pressing in from all sides. Not long after, a knock came. Not the violent pounding from this morning, but sharp, precise, almost smug. When I opened the door, 3 HOA board members stood waiting. They weren't thugs with tattoos. They were retirees, polo shirts tucked into khakis, clipboards tucked under their arms, but their presence rattled me just the same. "John," said Mr. Harris, the board president, his voice flat, formal. "We've had multiple reports of disturbance. We need to talk." Behind him, Miss Danner pursed her lips like she'd bitten into a lemon. "Some neighbors are saying your son attacked inspectors. Others claim law enforcement was involved. Either way, the community deserves answers." My jaw tightened. "You saw what happened? Those weren't inspectors. They were criminal. They tried to drag Ethan out of my house." Mrs. Danner sniffed. "That's not what it looked like on the video." I froze. "What video?" Harris adjusted his glasses. "A resident recorded the scuffle. It's already circulating in the HOA forum. From the angle shown, it looks like your guests assaulted officials." Sarah's voice cut in from behind me, sharp with disbelief. "Officials? They had tattoos. They broke into our home. They tried to kidnap our son. How can you call that official?" But Harris only raised a hand. "I'm not here to debate facts. I'm here to remind you of the bylaws. Section 12, residents must not engage in conduct that disrupts the peace or reputation of the community." My blood boiled. "So instead of protecting families, you're worried about reputation." Miss Danner's gaze darted past me, settling on Ethan. Her tone softened, but in a way that felt rehearsed. "We just want to make sure the boy is safe. Perhaps a temporary relocation would calm tensions for everyone's benefit." Ethan shrank back, pressing into Sarah's side. I stepped forward, voice low and dangerous. "You're not taking him anywhere." The third board member, a quiet man named Lel, finally spoke. "John, tensions are high. If you cooperate, we can de-escalate. Refuse, and well, the board has authority to escalate matters formally." I didn't miss the threat. Neither did Sarah. She pulled Ethan away, whispering, "John, please don't." I shut the door on them, my hands trembling with rage. Outside, I heard Harris mutter, "This isn't over," before their footsteps retreated down the walkway. Inside, the house suddenly felt smaller, walls closing in. Sarah rounded on me, her voice breaking. "They're turning the whole neighborhood against us. First those thugs, now the board. What if this was the plan all along, to isolate us?" Ethan hugged himself, whispering, "Everyone hates us now." I knelt, gripping his shoulders firmly. "Listen to me, son. They don't get to decide who we are. They don't get to take you. Not while I'm still breathing." But even as I said it, I could feel the truth gnawing at me. The SEALs had warned us the network had inside help, and now the HOA wasn't just passive. It was complicit. That night, as unmarked federal vehicles idled quietly at the corner, the glow of phones lit up across the neighborhood. Posts, comments, rumors spreading like fire. Our fortress had become a fishbowl, and the wolves were circling closer. By sundown, the street looked normal again. Lawns watered, porch lights glowing, but the quiet was wrong. Too neat, like a set waiting for the curtain to rise. Sarah tried to cook dinner, but none of us had an appetite. Ethan pushed peas around his plate, barely eating a bite. His eyes kept darting to the window, the way a rabbit looks for hawks. At 9 p.m. the hum started, low, mechanical, a faint buzz above the house. I stepped onto the back porch, heart hammering against the darkening sky. A small drone hovered, lights blinking red and green. It bobbed in the air, shifting angles, its camera eye glinting like a predator. "John," Sarah's voice trembled from the kitchen door. She saw it too. "They're watching us." Before I could answer, headlights flicked on at the end of the street. A black SUV parked where no neighbors ever parked, engine running low. My fists clenched. This wasn't coincidence. It was intimidation. Ethan appeared beside Sarah, whispering, "Dad, are they coming back?" I pulled him close. "Not tonight, son. Not while I'm here." But my words felt thin against the hum of that drone, circling like a vulture. Minutes later, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house, sharp, jarring. Sarah froze. Ethan jumped. I moved carefully, checked the peephole. No one stood at the door, just a small cardboard box on the porch. Something in my gut twisted. I didn't touch it. Instead, I called Price. Within 5 minutes, 2 unmarked sedans rolled up silently. Agents stepping out, guns low but ready. Price himself examined the box. He didn't flinch, just signaled his men. One of them scanned it, then carried it to the curb with gloved hands. A moment later, boom, the explosion wasn't massive, but enough to send a flash and a thunderous crack rolling down the block. The neighbors screamed, porch lights flipped on, Sarah yanked Ethan back from the window. Price turned to me, jaw tight. Flashbang, not meant to kill, just to terrorize. Classic tactic, rattle the family, make the kid panic. Ethan buried his face in Sarah's chest, sobbing now. My stomach twisted with rage. Across the street I saw silhouettes in windows, phones raised. Recording, no doubt spinning their own stories. Not one person came to check if we were safe. The drone buzzed lower, mocking us. That's when one of Price's men raised a rifle and fired a single shot. The drone cracked and spiraled, crashing into the lawn with a metallic crunch. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. Price crouched to Ethan's level, his voice firm but kind. Listen to me, son. They want to scare you. They want you to believe you're alone, but you're not. We're here and as long as we're here, nobody touches you. Understand? Ethan nodded weakly, though tears streaked his cheeks. Sarah whispered, how long can this go on? Price's gaze hardened. Until we cut the head off the network. And make no mistake, they've marked this family. They won't stop until we stop them. They won't stop until we stop them. That night we didn't sleep. Federal agents stayed stationed outside, shadows moving at the edges of the property. The SUV down the block eventually rolled away, but not before I memorized its license plate, burned it into my mind. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, Sarah's hand clutching mine tight. Through the walls I could hear Ethan whispering to himself, over and over like a prayer. They're not going to take me. They're not going to take me. And I swore in the darkness with every fiber of my being. Over my dead body, son. Over my dead body. The morning after the flashbang attack. The neighborhood felt colder than January. No drone buzzed above. No SUV lurked at the corner. But that silence wasn't relief. It was the silence of predators crouched in tall grass, waiting. I brewed coffee with hands still unsteady. Sarah sat at the table, her face pale, eyes shadowed from a night without sleep. Ethan lingered by the window, watching the street like a soldier on watch duty. Every noise made him flinch. The rattle of the AC, the squeak of a floorboard. My boy, who used to laugh loud enough to wake the block, now breathed like a hunted animal. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it ring, but instinct told me to answer. A growly voice disguised, filtered through. They're not done. They're closer than you think. And one of your own neighbors is feeding them. I stiffened. Who is this? The line went dead. Sarah looked up sharply. What did they say? I hesitated, then told her. She pressed her lips tight, her hands trembling as she gripped her mug. A half hour later, Price arrived with 2 agents carrying files. He spread them across our dining table. Surveillance photos, bank transfers, HOA email. We pulled what we could overnight, he said grimly. The imposter network's been using inside help. Access to rosters, bylaws, door codes. That doesn't come from random thugs. That comes from someone with authority. He tapped a photo. My guts sank. Mr. Harris, HOA board president. Price continued. Your friendly neighborhood bylaws enforcer has been on their payroll for months. Offshore accounts, untraceable cash drops. He funnels them, addresses, family schedules, even which households are easiest to pressure. This isn't just a hobby. This is Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Harris, the man who stood on our porch yesterday, quoting bylaws at us. I felt the old heat rising in my chest. The same rage I carried overseas when betrayal came from the inside. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Ethan whispered. He lives right across the street. His eyes widened, horrified. Price's gaze hardened, which makes it easier for them to watch you and harder for you to know who to trust. Sarah stood abruptly, pacing. He smiled at us for years. Came to the block barbecue. He gave Ethan a Christmas card last year. Her voice broke. And now he's selling our son out, like he's cargo. I rose slowly, the weight of it pressing on my shoulders. So what happens now? You arrest him? Price shook his head. Not yet. We need him to lead us to the bigger players. If we move too soon, the rest scatter. This network's like ants. You crush one and 10 more vanish underground. Sarah exploded. So we're just supposed to live across from the man trying to hand our boy over. Pretend nothing's wrong. Price's tone softened, but it didn't hide the steel beneath. I don't like it either, but the quickest way to end this is to let Harris hang himself on the rope he's already tied. I slammed a fist into the table. He already planted bombs on my porch. Already scarred my kid. How much more rope do you need? The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan's small voice cut through it like a blade. Dad, I don't want to go outside anymore. That broke Sarah. She pulled him into her arms, tears spilling freely. Price packed the files, his eyes meeting mine. We'll station men nearby, discreet. You keep your doors locked, your boy inside. Harris will slip soon. When he does, we'll be ready. But as the day dragged on and Harris went about his business across the street, watering his roses, waving casually at passers-by, rage built inside me like a storm. Neighbors whispered louder now, emboldened. I heard one murmur to another, maybe John brought this on himself. He's always been different. Another muttered, where there's smoke, there's fire. They weren't whispering to avoid me. They were whispering so I would hear. By evening, a letter appeared in our mailbox. HOA letterhead. Official stamped notice of violation. Due to repeated disturbances and failure to cooperate with inspectors, the board will consider further disciplinary measures, including potential removal proceedings at the next meeting. Sarah's hands shook as she read it aloud. Ethan cried, begging us not to let them take it. I crumpled the paper in my fist, my voice low and shaking with fury. They think they can bury us in bylaws. They think they can make us Paris until we break. But they've forgotten something. Sarah looked at me through her tears. I stared out the window across the street at Harris's neat little house with its glowing porch light. They've forgotten that I don't break. And I sure as hell don't forgive betrayal. The house was quiet, but in my chest, a storm was already roaring. And when it broke, no bylaw, no impostor, no traitor in khakis would be left standing. The night after we learned the truth about Harris, none of us slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his smug smile across the street. I saw him sipping his sweet tea, tending his roses, all while feeding wolves our son's name. By dawn my anger had cooled into something more dangerous. Focus. At Borough 700 sharp, Price returned with the seal. They didn't knock loud this time, just a quiet tap, like comrades slipping into an outpost. Sarah brewed coffee for everyone, her hands steady now. She'd crossed into the same state of mind I knew from deployments. Fear burned away, leaving only steel. Price laid out the plan. Harris scheduled an emergency HOA board meeting in 3 nights. Agenda says it's about your violations. But we intercepted chatter. That's the drop. He's supposed to pass Ethan's file to their handlers. I frowned. Handlers. Price nodded. The imposter network doesn't move without layers. Harris isn't top of the food chain. He's bait. He delivers the file. Someone bigger collects. That's our chance to nail them. The SEALs leaned in, expressions hard. One of them, Cole, spoke for the first time. We'll be inside, disguised as residents. Plain clothes, clipped hair, friendly smiles. But under the table, we'll be carrying. If they move, we move faster. Sarah stiffened. You're saying we'll be sitting in the same room as them? Price looked at her steadily. Yes, it's the only way. If Harris thinks he's safe, he'll lead us right to his buyer. If he suspects a thing, he'll clam up. And the whole block stays in danger. Ethan, who had been quiet until now, piped up. His voice was thin but sharp. You mean we just pretend like nothing happened? Like he didn't try to take me? The room went silent. I placed a hand on my son's shoulder, squeezing gently. No, son. We don't pretend. We endure until it's time to strike. The SEALs exchanged glances, nodding faintly. They knew that mindset well. The next 3 days crawled by like months. Neighbors acted as though the world was normal. Mowing lawns, jogging, grilling, but beneath the surface whispers spread. Some avoided us. Others stared too long. A few even muttered openly about troublemakers who brought this on themselves. Through it all, Harris played his part. He waved at passers-by, tinkered with his garage tools, smiled in church. A wolf wearing a paper mask. At night, Sarah and I took shifts, watching from the front window, whispering in the dark like soldiers in a foxhole. Ethan stayed close, rarely leaving our sight. His laughter was gone, but his eyes had changed, harder, sharper. He was learning too early what betrayal looked like. On the third night, the trap was ready. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a beige windowless building that smelled of old carpet and cheaper coffee. Normally, only a dozen bored residents showed up. Tonight, nearly 50 packed the room. Word of discipline had spread like wildfire. Some came to watch a spectacle. Others came to whisper in corners. Sarah and I sat near the front, Ethan between us. My gut churned at the thought of bringing him into the lion's den. But Price insisted. If Harris doesn't see the boy, he'll know something's off. Across the room, I spotted Cole and the other SEALs, disguised perfectly, khakis, polo shirts, name tags clipped to collars. They looked like realtors or dads who coached soccer, but their eyes never stopped scanning. Harris took the podium. His tie was too tight, his smile too wide. He tapped a microphone, pretending authority. Good evening, neighbors. Tonight we must discuss a serious matter of compliance. Certain families, his gaze flicked to us, have repeatedly defied inspection and disrupted harmony. Our bylaws are clear. Enforcement is necessary. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some nodded. Others looked uneasy. Price, seated discreetly in the back, shifted slightly, just enough for me to know the net was closing. Then Harris pulled a folder from his briefcase, thick manila marked with our name. My pulse thundered in my ears. This file contains documented violations. It will be transferred to the appropriate parties for review and further action. That was the signal. The side door creaked open. A man slipped in, tall, wearing a suit too sharp for a neighborhood meeting, sunglasses indoors, a faint scar across his jaw. Not a neighbor, not a board member, the buyer. Sarah's hand gripped mine under the table. Ethan stiffened, eyes wide. Price's gaze locked on mine, then flicked to the SEALs. They were ready. The room hummed with tension, unaware of the storm about to break. Harris extended the file. The buyer reached for it. That single motion, so ordinary, so bureaucratic, was the handoff of betrayal. Years of smiling barbecues, fake hellos, Sunday waves, all collapsing into treachery in one manila folder. I rose halfway from my chair before Price's voice, calm but firm, cut across the room. Stop, federal agents, hands where I can see them. The room exploded in chaos. Gasps, screams, chairs scraping back. Harris froze, the folder still in his hand. The buyer reached under his jacket, too slow. Cole was already moving, faster than a whip. In 2 heartbeats, the buyer was face down, wrists locked in zip ties. Another SEAL had Harris pinned against the podium, the file snatched from his grasp. Neighbors shouted in disbelief. What's going on? They're cops? No, Harris is the president. Price raised his badge, voice cutting through the noise. These men aren't inspectors, they're conspirators, and they're under federal arrest. The silence that followed Den was louder than the shouts before. Every eye turned to Harris, his mask cracked. The neighbor, the smiling president, now reduced to a traitor, trembling under a soldier's grip. Ethan leaned closer to me, whispering with awe. Dad, they caught him. I swallowed hard, my voice low. Yeah, son, but this was just the handoff. The real storm's still coming. When the buyer hit the floor and Harris was dragged away in cuffs, I thought for a fleeting second that it was over, that the nightmare had burned itself out right here in this ugly carpeted room. But then the lights died. 1 second the room buzzed with gasps and mutter. The next it was swallowed in black, total choking darkness. Sarah screamed sharp and short, cut off as I pulled her and Ethan close. Chairs clattered. People shouted over one another. Someone ran for the door. It slammed shut from the outside. Then came the sound I'd hoped never to hear again on American soil. Automatic fire. Short bursts, deliberate, just enough to rattle the windows and make the civilians dive to the floor. The shots weren't random. They were warning shots. A message. Price's voice cut through the panic, calm as ever. Everyone down. Stay low. The SEALs moved in the dark like sharks in deep water. Their footsteps were silent, purposeful. One flicked on a tactical flashlight, its beam slicing across the room just long enough to spot the exits. Another shouted, barricade the doors. I dragged a table over with my shoulder, Sarah clutching Ethan tight beside me. My heart slammed against my ribs, but my mind had switched to soldier's mode. Angles, cover, timing. The training never left. Through the broken windows, I saw shadows moving. More men, more impostors. They weren't inspectors this time. They weren't even pretending. Black masks, rifles, hard eyes. These weren't amateurs. They were operators, hired muscle, probably ex-MERS, maybe even ex-military. They'd come to erase everything. The file, the buyer, Harris, the witnesses, all of us. The first breach came fast. A side door splintered under a boot. A masked figure rushed in, weapon raised, only to be tackled in a blur. Cole slammed him into the floor, wrenching the rifle free before the man could even scream. In 3 seconds flat, the attacker was zip-tied and gagged. But for everyone, they stopped. More pressed in. Glass shattered at the back of the hall. 2 gunmen climbed through. I shoved Sarah and Ethan behind the podium and grabbed the fallen rifle. My shoulders still remembered the weight of it, the way recoil worked with breath. The first man cleared the window, crouching low. I squeezed the trigger. Short burst, controlled. He dropped like a rag doll. The second flinched, hesitated. That hesitation cost him. Price's round snapped through the dark, sending him tumbling back through the broken pane. Screams filled the hall. Neighbors huddled under tables, crying, praying. These people had come expecting fines and petty disputes. Now they were in the middle of a war zone. Ethan clung to Sarah, his eyes wide, reflecting the flashlight beams like glass marbles. He was shaking, but he didn't cry. He just kept his gaze fixed on me, watching, learning. Minutes stretched like hours. Each breach, each clash felt like the last, but the attackers kept coming. This wasn't a scare tactic. It was an extermination order. At one point I caught sight of Harris on the floor, where the SEALs had pinned him. He was screaming, spitting curses. "You don't know who you're dealing with. They'll burn this whole block to the ground." Price didn't flinch. He pressed a knee harder into Harris's back, keeping him pinned. His calm voice cut through the chaos. "We know exactly who we're dealing with." It wasn't bravado. It was a promise. We managed to hold the center for 20 minutes, maybe 30. It's hard to judge time when every second is coated in adrenaline. But eventually the assault slowed. The gunfire tapered. The shadows outside retreated. Cole peeked through a crack in the barricaded door. "They're pulling back." Price nodded. "Not retreating. Regrouping." That chill settled back into my bones. They hadn't given up. They were just setting the board for the next move. The evacuation was chaos, but necessary. Civilians were shepherded out the rear, escorted by the SEALs 2 at a time. I carried Ethan in my arms. Though he protested he could walk, his small voice whispered against my ear, "Dad, are they coming back?" I didn't lie. "Yes." He swallowed hard. "Then I'll stay awake. I won't let them surprise us again." It broke me hearing that. A boy shouldn't have to speak like a soldier, but I kissed the side of his head and whispered back, "That's my son." We made it to our house just before dawn. The neighborhood looked the same. Neatly trimmed lawns, sprinklers hissing, American flags hanging limp in the still air. But to me, every shadow held an enemy. Every window felt like a rifle sight. Inside, the SEALs turned our home into a forward operating bay. Radios, maps, weapons laid across the dining table, where Sarah once set out Sunday roasts. The smell of gun oil mixed with the faint scent of her lavender candles. A surreal collision of worlds. Price spread a map, marking points with a grease pencil. "They'll try again. Not here. Too exposed. They'll hit when you're isolated. School bus stop, grocery lot. Anywhere they can snatch the boy without a scene." Sarah's face went pale. "So, what do we do? Never leave the house?" Price's eyes locked with mine. "No. We take the fight to them. End this before it spreads." I felt it then. That old weight I'd carried overseas, the one I thought I'd buried. The responsibility not just to protect my family, but to stand in the gap. To stop men like this, before they could harm anyone else. For years I'd been just a father, a husband, a neighbor. Now the past was calling me back. Sarah reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it tight. "John, whatever happens, we face it together." I nodded. My voice came out steady, even as the storm gathered. "Then let's finish it." Outside, the sun rose over quiet streets. But peace was an illusion. War had come to our neighborhood, dressed in blue jackets with HOA on the back, and the next battle would decide whether this place stayed a community or became a graveyard. I never thought I'd see the day I was planning an assault again. Not in this quiet suburb. Not with my wife and son asleep upstairs, while I traced lines on a map with men who once carried me through fire overseas. But dawn bled into morning, and the SEALs were ready. Price stood at the head of the table, calm as always, his voice a low rumble. "They'll expect us to hunker down. They'll expect fear, so we give them the opposite." Cole adjusted his vest. "We go to them. cut the head off the snake. My gut clenched. Every instinct as a father screamed to stay home, to build walls higher, keep Sarah and Ethan hidden. But the soldier in me knew that was no lie. It was just waiting to be hunted. Ethan sat at the stairs, eavesdropping, his face pale, but his eyes burning with something older than his years. He didn't say a word, but when I caught his gaze, I knew he wasn't just scared anymore. He wanted this ended too. By noon we were in the old white, paint peeling, the kind delivery guys use. Inside it smelled of metal and sweat, bristling with rifles, radios and crates. Sarah hugged me at the door, whispered into my ear, "Bring them home, all of them." The warehouse was 3 men out, past the strip malls, tucked between an auto shop and a recycling yard. From the outside it looked abandoned, rusted siding, busted windows, graffiti scrolled across the walls, but the seals had intel, heat signatures inside, dozens of them. Price studied it through the scope, 30, maybe 35 men, rotating shifts. Harris wasn't exaggerating. This is their nest. We moved in silence, boots crunching gravel, rifles low, my breath steady, controlled, back in the groove, back in the rhythm I thought I'd buried. At the side entrance, Cole clipped the lock with bolt cutters. The door groaned open. We slid in. The air inside stank of oil and cigarettes. Fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead. Down the hall voices echoed. Men laughing, arguing, oblivious. Then like clockwork, everything snapped into motion. Price's hand signal, flashbang through the doorway. White light, thunder crack. The seals stormed the room with precision, cutting the laughter short. Shouts, curses, gunfire snapping in panic. 2 down before they even knew we were there. I hugged the wall, covering the flank, squeezing bursts into the shadows where figures scrambled. Cole grabbed Harris's desk, his command post, maps, and fake HOA papers strewn across it. "They're running this like a cartel," he muttered, sweeping the papers into a pack. "But worse, they're wearing authority like a mask." The firefight spilled into the corridor. Bullets chewed plaster, sparks rained from torn wiring. My shoulders screamed from recoil, but adrenaline carried me forward. One man lunged from the side with a blade, too close to aim. I smashed the butt of the rifle into his jaw, felt bone crunch under the blow. Room by room we cleared the nest, each step deeper into the belly of the beast. They weren't HOA inspectors. They weren't even gangsters anymore. They were mercenaries. Mercenaries with clipboards and bylaws using neighborhood laws as cover for extortion, kidnapping, worse. And Harris had only been a lieutenant. Price dragged another captive into the hall, zip-tied and gagged. "Where's your commander? Where's the one giving orders?" The man spat blood, sneered, "You're already too late." Before Price could press further, a klaxon blared overhead. Red strobes pulsed. Steel shutters slammed down over the exits. We were trapped. The next 5 minutes were a blur of fire and fury. They swarmed us, a tide of masked men, rifles barking in the dim red light. Every corner became a kill zone. Every hallway a funnel of death. Cole took a graze across the arm, hissed through clenched teeth but kept firing. Price moved like a phantom, his rifle never missing, his orders crisp even in the chaos. And me, I fought like a man with everything to lose. Because I did. Images of Ethan's face burned in my mind, Sarah's voice in my ear. I wasn't fighting for medals, for country, for orders. I was fighting for one boy's chance to walk to school without fear, for a wife who deserved peace in her kitchen without gunmen at her door. I fought like a father, and fathers don't surrender. We breached the final chamber, a massive open floor, concrete walls, crates stacked high. At its center the commander stood, taller, broader, face obscured by a black mask. He carried no rifle, just a pistol, casual in his grip. "So," he said, voice booming under the rafters, "you're the ones who embarrassed my men." Price raised his weapon. "Drop it. It's over." The man chuckled. "Over? This was never about your boy. He was leverage. The real game is bigger. HOA was just the shell. We're in cities all over this country. Every neighborhood, every rule. We own fear." He raised the pistol. Everything slowed. I saw the twitch of his finger, the flash at the muzzle. I shoved Price aside, the round grazing my ribs, fire tearing across my side. But before he could fire again, Ethan's voice cut through the den. "Hey!" From the catwalk above, My son stood, small, terrified but defiant. In his hands, the flashlight Price had given him for safety. He shone it straight into the commander's eyes, blinding him for the split second we needed. Price's shot rang out, clean, precise. The masked man collapsed, pistol clattering across the concrete. Silence followed, heavy, final. The shutters lifted minutes later as federal backup stormed in, summoned by the SEAL's beacon. The surviving impostors were dragged out in cuffs, their empire crumbling in the light of day. I staggered to my feet, clutching my bleeding side. Ethan scrambled down the ladder, running into my arms, shaking but alive. "You saved me," I whispered into his hair. His voice cracked but held steady. "No, Dad. We saved each other." Sarah's embrace came next, her sobs muffled against my chest. For the first time in weeks, the weight lifted. The nightmare was ending. As the sun dipped, painting the warehouse in gold, Price clapped a hand on my shoulder. "It's done. But remember, fear wears many uniforms. Stay sharp." I nodded. "I will, because I knew the truth now. Evil doesn't always march in with flags and drums. Sometimes it knocks on your door at 7 a.m. in the morning, wearing a jacket that says, but as long as I drew breath, they would never take my family again." Morning came softer than it had in weeks. No pounding on the door, no blue jackets on the porch, just sunlight slanting across the kitchen floor, and the steady drip of the coffee maker. Sarah stood at the sink, hair tied back, hands steady again. Ethan was still asleep upstairs, finally resting the way a teenager should, sprawled, careless, dreaming without fear. At 8 sharp, there was a knock at the door, not the violent hammering of the night before, just a measured rap. I opened it to see Price, coffee in one hand, paperwork in the other. Cole stood beside him, with his arm in a sling, grinning like nothing could dent him. "It's wrapped," Price said simply, laying the stack on the table. "The impostors are in federal custody. The warehouse is sealed, the accounts frozen. Your family's safe." Sarah exhaled. I exhaled, a sound caught between laughter and relief. "So it's really over." Price gave the smallest shrug. "This branch? Yes, but your street, your son, you're clear." He touched my shoulder, then scribbled a word on the back of a card and left it outside Ethan's door. "Proud." Cole paused on the porch as they left. "You move better than some rookies I've trained." He smirked. "Take care of that rib." Then they were gone, swallowed by the ordinary quiet of morning. By noon, the neighborhood began to stir again. Lawns got mowed. Flags were lowered halfway. People stepped out with cautious faces. Hank shuffled over, carrying 2 coffees, eyes down. "I should have been there," he muttered. "I saw the jackets and assumed. Won't happen again." He pressed the cup into my hand like an apology carved in paper. Mrs. Carver came later. Her robe was gone, replaced with Sunday best. She hugged Sarah long and promised to bake something Ethan liked. He heard her from the stairs, though he pretended not to. The HOA sent out an emergency bulletin. Harris had resigned. 2 board seats were empty. An audit was underway. At the hastily called meeting that night, faces looked smaller, voices quieter. They spoke as people do when they realized they had trusted the wrong shepherd. We didn't gloat, didn't need to. Truth carried its own weight. Ethan walked beside me to that meeting, hood up, eyes sharp. Some neighbors avoided his gaze, but more of them stopped to shake his hand, even hug him. One little boy slipped him a hand-drawn card, 2 stick figures with capes. Ethan folded it into his pocket without a word. Inside, a retired attorney named Mrs. Delaney rose to her feet. "Real authority doesn't come in the night with fake papers," she said. "From now on, we keep oversight in the hands of neighbors, not strangers in jackets." The vote passed. Hands lifted and something lifted with it, the weight that had been pressing down for too long. That night, we ate at the kitchen table that had been our war map. The pencil marks still showed where we'd sketched defenses. Sarah lit a candle anyway. We sat in the light of it, letting the quiet heal us. Later, Ethan helped me drag the barricade back to the garage. He moved slower than he thought I noticed, but he carried his end. On the porch we sat, listening to sprinklers and cicadas. "Dad," he said softly. "Yeah, bud. Was I brave or just scared at the right time? I studied him. The fading bruise on his wrist. The new strength in his jaw. Both, I told him. That's the only kind of brave that matters. He leaned into me, eyes fixed on the street. I don't want to stay angry forever. You won't, I said. We'll trade anger for awareness. That's how we go on. Weeks later, life looked ordinary again. Mailboxes held only mail. The porch light was just a porch light. Federal sedans drifted by now and then. Silent guardians. The community center hung a simple plaque. This neighborhood stands because its people stood. No names. Didn't need any. At the block barbecue, Hank overdid the potato salad. Kids chalked heroes on the sidewalk. And Ethan was drafted as referee for a lawn game no one plays fairly. His whistle blew too often, and the old men cheered anyway. Before bed that night, I walked the fence line. At the gate, I looked down to the quiet street and whispered to the dark, "Not on my watch." Inside, Ethan slept soundly. A boy again. A house at peace. They had sent men in jackets. Called it law. Called it order. They thought fear was power. They didn't know Navy SEALs were drinking coffee in my kitchen. And now they know better.